Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Raw to Rageous. It's Tuesday, October 8th, 2019. It's a little after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I should be off work in about an hour and a half to 2 hours. I get off at 3, and I plan on heading home. It's about an hour and a half drive home. But the sun goes down about 7 o'clock, a few minutes before 7 o'clock this evening. But the moon is going to rise at 4:40, 4:45. The wind should be about 5 miles an hour out of the southeast, and the temperature is going to be about 68 degrees. In fact, we're expecting low 30s by the end of the week overnight, which is crazy at this time of the year. Now, we're outside of this new moon cycle that I've talked a little bit about, and I could stay home, but I'm going to see what happens in the off chance that the lunar rise to the lunar transit is going to generate just enough activity that we're going to see something happen. The transit occurs about 9 o'clock, 9:30, 9:45, somewhere in there. And like I mentioned, the moonrise happens about 4:45 this afternoon. So there may be a little bit of activity as we transition from one to the other. More than anything else, I'm still doing continued testing and letting you know and passing along to you what's happening between each of these different transition cycles, especially the one between the moon rise and the lunar transit. I've talked about that in previous videos. So hang tight. We'll see what happens this evening and see what comes in or what doesn't come in. But either way, it's going to be a beautiful evening. The temperature is going to be cool. The wind is going to be light. It should be a great sit, environmentally speaking. So hang tight. Now, I did want to mention that me having that crossbow fall over in my living room and land on the scope absolutely had an impact on my sighting in. The first shot that I took was a 25-yard shot with my laser rangefinder to make sure that I had my distance right. And it was 15 inches off at 25 yards. In fact, it was 15 inches high. So any shot that I would have taken between 25 and 50 yards out would have shot clean over the back of something. And what likely would have occurred is any shot over about 18 yards would have shot over, because the deer, when they hear the string, are going to dip a little bit. And that's one of the things that you need to account for when you're taking shots. Something else, while we're on the subject of taking shots, it's very important to remember in archery that if you're shooting downhill, you need to drop your sight window a little bit, because the arrow will do what we call float. Because the arrow or the bolt or the shaft is accelerating toward the gravitational pull of the earth naturally, it's going to seem to float. So if you will shoot lower than what you're actually aiming at for your crosshair target, then the arrow or the shaft will float up and into your target. Conversely, if you're shooting uphill, you need to aim high, because the gravitational pull is going to have some draw down of that trajectory. So how far you raise up and how far you drop down, depending on which way your angle is, largely depends on the distance between you and the target. So that's one of the things that you're going to have to practice with the equipment that you have. But hang tight. We're going to see what happens this evening and cross our fingers that the moon rise to the moon transit is going to produce something good for us this evening. Back up in the tree stand, it's 5:18 p.m. Winds out of the southeast at about 5 to 10 miles an hour this evening. It should die down as we get closer to dark. The moon rose about 30 minutes ago, almost 40 minutes ago. So we're in the transitional period, in that key quadrant between the moon rise and the moon transit, which happens well after dark. So just going to take a gamble. I know this is outside the new moon phase, but we're going to see what happens tonight. I want to give a quick shout out to the guys over at the hunting grounds. Just wanted to tell you guys you do great work. Really appreciate what you do. For those of you who are new to the Raw to Rageous channel, give them a look. Go check out their stuff. They do some really incredible stuff. All right, everybody, it's time to tell the truth. I did go out last night. Today's October 9th, 2019. It is Wednesday. Went out last night. The sun set at 6:54 p.m. So legal shooting time stopped at 7:24 p.m. Right at 6:18 p.m. last night, I had a big 7-point come in that I've been tracking on camera for the last 2.5 months. I've named this deer Gambler because he's a 7-point. He's got a really big fork on the right side, and he's got a mainframe 8 set up on the left beam. But a really nice deer. He's not super old. He's not one of those really big deer as far as the rack is concerned, but he's a big-bodied deer. And big-bodied deer mean plenty of meat. He came in at the last possible moment for legal shooting time. And I felt like I had a pretty decent shot, so I kicked one off. And what happened was I hit him in the base of the neck, but I hit him too high. There's a spot, and I call it a kind of a magical spot, where the neck vertebrae drop down and do a little hook move before they go up across the top of the back, kind of like a sink trap does. Well, if you hit that spot just right, you will not only miss cutting and severing the spinal cord and miss completely the vertebrae, but you will also miss the shoulder blade. But somehow, for some crazy reason, whether it's a nerve or something, every time you hit that spot, and I'll show it to you on a diagram or a picture here real soon, but every time you hit that spot, they go straight down. And what I was trying to do, because I had a broadside shot, last possible moment, is I was trying to hit that magical spot. Now the problem is, if you miss it, you're going to create bone damage in the shoulder blade or the scapula, or you're going to create bone damage in the vertebrae. But in either case, you're going to make a pretty decent hit. Break the shoulder blade and go through the shoulder blade, then you're going to clip the top of the lungs. And, you know, not the most ideal shot to put the bone damage into the middle of that, but it's not the worst shot. I think many of us have had the worst shot, paunch shots and things like that. It's just, unfortunately, it's part of deer hunting. It comes with years and years and years of experience, and you just learn these things. I was trying to place the shot in that magical spot right up there at the top of the shoulder, at the base of the neck vertebrae, and I missed it by 2.5 inches. And as a result, what wound up happening is I went through the fleshy part of the neck. And like I mentioned in an earlier video, I'm using Schwacker broadheads right now. I think I'm going to go ahead and change over to my Rage Hypodermics. Last year when I used those, they really performed well. The Schwackers seem to work pretty decent as long as you're going through the rib cage and not hitting any bone. Once they hit bone, they slow down really, really fast. And my experience last year with the hypodermics from Rage was that they slipped through just about anything they hit. And so I was really impressed with those. I'm going to re-business end the front end of my shafts, and the next time I make it out, which is not going to be today, I've got some winterizing to do at the house. But the next time I get out, those will be on the front end of my shafts, my bolts. So we'll see what happens. The blood trail, just for your information and for learning purposes, the blood trail was very, very faint. It probably took about 40 to 45 yards to pick up the first sign of blood. Fortunately, from the tree stand, I was able to hear and listen to where this deer went through. Now, he crashed pretty hard over a fence that I thought was a good indication that he was going to fall. He went through the timber, and as deer will almost always do when they're hit, he went the path of least resistance after the adrenaline started kicking in. Along the blood trail, it was really spotty and really patchy. Blood spots and droplets weren't coming down but about every 10 to 15 feet, and it was that way for quite a distance. There was not the real free flow that needs to be there to put an animal down. So the fact that he was still mobile indicated to me that the spinal cord was not severed. The bone damage was non-existent to speak of. It just wasn't a kill shot. And that is one of the very few things that I cannot stand about hunting, is sometimes you take a shot, you think everything's in play, and it just doesn't come together. Fortunately, this animal is going to recover, and he's going to have some scarring on his skin on both sides of his neck, but he's going to make it through. So that is a plus. That's a bonus in this. I've gained a little bit of seasonal experience, and like always, I'm going to be a little more careful with my shot placement next time, and I'm going to be very deliberate as to what time I'm willing to take a shot and what time I'm not. This one right here, like I mentioned, it was on the very verge. I felt like I had the animal in my sights. I knew exactly where I was targeting, but in this case, trying to hit that one spot to drop him quick, which I've done many, many times, it's a very successful and effective shot. But 2.5 inches, 2 inches, 3 inches makes all the difference in the world when you're trying to place one right there. Now, I mentioned that when I dropped the crossbow, my scope got jarred, but I wasn't sure entirely how far off it was. I mentioned also a little bit later that it was 15 inches off at 25 yards. That is a huge discrepancy. So I re-sighted in, and I was good at 25 yards, I was good at 35 to 38 yards, and I'm dead on. I can hit a 7-inch pie plate or an 8-inch pie plate at 50 to 55 yards. So I feel really confident now with my shooting. I'm going to have to test my sight in with the new broadheads again, make sure that they're planing right. And that just simply means, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, that means that they fly right. Interesting thing about sighting in arrows and bolts, if you use target tips and you change over to broadheads without testing your broadhead flight, you're going to be off just a little bit. And sometimes that difference can mean everything. Kind of like this. A 2-inch or 3-inch movement in a broadhead placement can literally mean putting a deer down immediately or not putting one down at all. So we went out, we looked, and it didn't happen last night. Fortunately, I really believe this. We're going to get another crack at this deer a little bit later. It's probably going to be a couple of weeks before he feels super comfortable coming back into that place where he got his neck popped. So that's all right. That's part of hunting. We know it, and we roll with it. So that's the story from last night. I want to mention, too, I went out last night to test the moon cycling and the modeling that we've talked about so much. The moon rose before 5 o'clock, shortly before 5 o'clock, and was due to hit its transit location well after dark. So it was that quadrant of the moon day where the moonrise transitions to the lunar transit, and the deer activity or the deer movement dips right after the rise for a little bit, and then it slowly progresses and climbs until you get close to the transit, and then it spikes pretty good. So I was in that quadrant of time. The only deer I saw is the one that I shot at, and I'm not surprised by that. I do want to mention that one of the things that I'm testing too is scents. Now, last night was the first time that I put even a hint of scent out. I got into the tree stand pretty clean. I wasn't sweating. The mosquitoes weren't real bad, and they have been the last couple of days because the temperature's dropping and we've had these fronts moving in. But I got up in the stand really clean, which was great. And as I got up, I thought, you know what, I'm going to try this. I've got a little regular deer urine, not estrus, but I had a little regular deer urine in a bottle that I put on a little scent wick and just the very, very tip of it, so that that scent would float across the breeze and float across the air currents just enough to cover any scent that I might have with me. Now, I wasn't really that concerned about it, but I think that did have something to do with this buck coming in, with Gambler coming in, because he came in directly downwind from my position. I only put out about 1/8 of an inch on the end of that scent wick of doe urine. Just enough. It wasn't, the point was not to bring deer in, not to be or serve as an attractant, but to serve as a cover scent. And Gambler picked up a little whiff of that and just slowly started making his way to me. So it worked out. I may or may not use another scent like that in the coming days, over the next week or week and a half. It's still a little bit early to be getting serious about scent usage, but cover scents are going to work for you right now. So if you've got something that you want to use, give it a try. Don't go excessive. See what happens and make your mental notes on what the outcome is. If it's working, then do it again. If you find and discover that it's not, and one of the quick ways that you'll know it is that the deer will blow at you if they're downwind. They'll smell you. If they do that, don't do it again. at least don't do it in the immediate future. The last thing that I want to say today is at some point we're going to get some venison on the ground, and when we do, I'm going to have some video footage of me butchering that deer. That's something that I was taught as a kid by my dad when we would bring animals home. These days, you can literally save yourself anywhere between $80 and $250 on butchering cost for an animal, depending on where you go, or at least in this neighborhood. So that's something to keep in mind. You can save yourself a tremendous amount of money, several $100s even, over the course of a season if you're very successful at dropping very many animals. So you can save yourself a considerable amount of money if you will learn to butcher your own animals if you haven't done it already. So be sure and look for those videos when we get some things on the ground, because they're coming. So on that note, folks, we're going to call this one a wrap. If you haven't done it yet, drop a like, drop a subscribe, pass this on to your friends. I want to thank you for watching Raw to Rageous, and we'll see you next time.